Okay, well, good morning, and thank you so much for participating or attending the webinar that we're holding today, looking at the condition of the New York Thruway. My name is Rocky Moretti. I'm the Director of Policy and Research with TRIP. TRIP is a transportation nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C. We're supported by a coalition of manufacturing, insurance, construction, labor, and engineering organizations. They look to us to be putting out reports throughout the year, looking at the condition and the use of our transportation system and how it impacts quality of life, both from a perspective of mobility and also from safety. We have put out over the last 50 years, over 600 reports similar to this. And just as recently as 2 days ago, we were releasing a report in Maryland. This report, the New York Thruway, the Empire State's Main Street, takes a look at this most critical piece of infrastructure in New York. The 570-mile Thruway system has been critical since it was opened 68 years ago in providing transportation throughout the state, both for people, but also for moving freight. The system includes the controlled system, which now goes by cashless tolling, which goes across the state, but particularly starting in the southern part of the state up towards Syracuse and right across to the Pennsylvania Turnpike. The system also includes a smaller branch system from Albany to the Massachusetts Turnpike, and also a barrier system, including the Governor Mario Cuomo Bridge and several barrier systems in the southern part of the state. We saw that travel was increasing steadily leading up to COVID. Had it increased 8% from 2012 to 2019. In 2020, travel on the Thruway dropped by 20% due to COVID, and we started to see those numbers come back up, and the latest projection is that travel by 2031 on the New York Thruway will increase by 9%. Currently, 83% of travel on the Thruway is of passenger vehicles, and 17% is of large commercial trucks. The system is funded through tolls by users of the Thruway system and also from concessionaires on the state's 27 service areas. They are currently going through a $450 million improvement or reconstruction that will see 23 of the 27 service areas rebuilt across the state or on the New York Thruway. In 2022, a consulting report from the Stantec Consulting Service was done to take a look at the system and noted a variety of critical findings. One was that the current toll rates and the proposed new toll rates remain below the average for Thruway systems across the country. The report also noted that revenue from the toll system, looking a decade in the past and looking ahead to 2031, is anticipated to increase by 36%. But during the same period, although there will be ongoing increases in revenue, the actual amount spent on the rehabilitation of pavements and bridges on the New York Thruway will actually decrease by 9% between 2012 and 2031, from $322 million to $294 million. The consultant report also found that the amount of borrowing to support the system continues to increase, and that has resulted in the actual cost to pay off the bonds that have been taken out to help fund the system. Those payments are anticipated to increase from 2012 to 2031 by 171%, from $200 million annually to $543 million. The report also found that travel on the Thruway is among the safest travel across the state. The current fatality rate on the New York Thruway system is 0.21 fatalities per 100 million miles of travel. That compares to an average across the state of 1 fatality per 100 million miles of travel. So it shows a significant benefit to the state in terms of keeping people safe. We also took a look at the life cycle of the Thruway's roads and bridges, and unfortunately, the report finds that based on current funding, the current condition of highways and bridges on the Thruway system are actually anticipated to deteriorate over the next decade. The report took a look at an assessment of surface distress on the Thruway. This looks at cracking, rutting, and shoulder defects, which are conducted annually to help forecast where improvements are needed. This found that 48% of the Thruway is in poor condition, 26% is in fair condition, and the remainder is in good condition. We also took a look at, based on anticipated future funding levels, the current or the future condition of the Thruway. The report finds that average pavement conditions are anticipated to decline by 31% on the Thruway system through 2028. Similarly, we had seen some modest improvements in bridge conditions prior to the COVID pandemic, but the latest data suggests that through 2027, we'll actually see a reduction in overall pavement, through 2027, it's anticipated that overall bridge ratings will decline by 2%. And as a result, the overall condition of the Thruway's bridges will decline into fair condition. We also took a look at the overall amount needed for maintaining the state's roads and bridges. And the report finds that the Thruway Authority has a $1.2 billion backlog in investment needed over the next decade in terms of maintaining the condition of the Thruway's pavements, highways, and bridges. The ability of the state to, the ability of the Thruway to maintain its critical highways and bridges is also being threatened by significant inflation in the cost of highway construction. The Federal Highway Administration, which on a quarterly basis looks at highway construction costs, which includes both materials and also labor, find that since the beginning of 2021, highway construction costs have increased by 50%. In conclusion, before I turn it over to Mr. Flesher, the Thruway remains absolutely vital to the quality of life and economy of New York State, and it will be critical that the Thruway has the resources to make sure that they're able to maintain this critical piece of infrastructure in New York. Michael, we'll look forward to hearing your comments.
Thank you. And I'll just quickly note that I think the report highlights the challenges of maintaining the critical and aging Thruway system. 75% of the Thruway bridges are over 60 years old. 80% of the underlying pavement dates back to the Thruway's original construction. So I think the report shows that the current plan without a toll increase would result in bridge and pavement conditions deteriorating, and that the Thruway, it's essential that the Thruway get the financial resources it needs to preserve and maintain the system and continue to provide that safe system that Rocky mentioned. Tolls is how the Thruway funds itself. And I think it's at this point, it's system-wide toll increases occur once every 15 years at this point. So it does show that the Thruway, does try to do all it can without going asking for a toll increase to maintain and preserve the infrastructure. But I do think this report clearly shows that the proposed toll increase is necessary, is needed, and the system needs it. And that's why the Thruway is proposing the toll increase and go through that public process. So I think the report clearly shows an aging system that needs resources to continue to provide its critical service to the people of the state.
Thank you. I'll now turn it over to my colleague Carolyn Kelly to explain how we'll handle questions and answers.
Thanks, Rocky, and thanks, Michael. My name is Carolyn Kelly. I'm the Director of Communications for TRIP. We'll have an opportunity for a Q&A with both Rocky and Michael right now. We'll do that by, you can enter questions into the Q&A chat box at the bottom of your screen. You can also use the raise hand function at the bottom to indicate that you have a question, and I'll be able to call on you and you'll be elevated to a panelist. So everyone will be able to see and hear you, and you can ask your question live of both of the speakers. While we wait for some questions to come in, I don't see any right now. I'll note that the full report is now up on TRIP's website. You can find that at tripnet, tripnet.org. The report is up there as well as the corresponding news release. And we will also have a recording of the news conference up on our website in roughly the next 30 minutes or so. So again, if you do have any questions, I invite you to use the raise hand function and I'll be able to call on you, or you can submit a question in the Q&A box down below.
Karen, looks like there's one question that's come in.
There was a note to say that the chat is disabled, but it should be functioning. So if you do have any issues, you can let me know, or use the raise hand function. We'll be able to call on you that way.
Sure. Michael, I just had one question for you. The Transportation Research Board put out a report in 2019, it was looking at the interstate system. And one of its findings was that there was essentially a sense of diminishing returns with preservation, both for highways and bridges, that as they age, that the ongoing routine repavings or minor repairs don't last as long. And the interstate was coming to a crisis because eventually the small repairs just don't last as long as they should. And eventually you have to face the underlying issues. I'm just wondering, when you were executive director, was there sort of a sense of that, or does that sort of ring true?
No, that's absolutely rings true, you know, and as report noted, or as I mentioned earlier, with 80% of the subbase being the original construction, that's where the pavements failed. It failed from the bottom up. So what you used to get a 10-year service life out of a 1R or repaving, then all of a sudden you're getting 8 years and 6 years. But it does pose the challenge of life cycle cost assessments and planning for the future. And when a Thruway or any state DOT is balancing its tight budgets, sometimes it's difficult to look at the long-term implications of the fixes we're making and focus on short-term. But in the long run, the system would be better and the public would be better served if the resources were available to do the full reconstructions and do the full fixes and provide and restore a 50-year pavement life, for example.
Thank you.
We have one question from Amal. Amal, if you unmute your line, you should be able to ask your question live of Rocky and Michael. Go right ahead.
Hi, this is Amal, WTN. Just quick question. Do you know, are there any specific areas where you've seen that need the most repairs, or is it really just all throughout?
Mike, I'll let you, Amal, from the material that we put the report together, did break it down regionally. But I'll also defer to Michael if he has any thoughts on that.
I think generally you'll see the more heavily trafficked areas deteriorate quicker, obviously, the ones that have more truck traffic. The Thruway has done some of the reconstructions, here in the Albany area and out in Rochester to try to get it in front of some of those issues. I think south of New Paltz, I think anyone who drives in that would say that's a place that needs attention, which I think it will be getting shortly. The bridges all being built at the same time are all aging at the same time, which makes it difficult to prioritize the bridges and try to do a lot more preventive maintenance. And I think the Thruway has, in fact, changed some of its strategy by having some of its maintenance workers being trained to do more in-depth preventive maintenance to kind of keep on top of the pavements until they can get the resources needed to do the full repairs that are necessary.
Now, I haven't looked at the New York State budget when it comes to public works repairs. Do you know, is there anything in the budget going towards Thruway repairs?
No, generally, the state budget or the state of New York doesn't provide any direct funding to the Thruway. The Mario Cuomo Bridge did get got a good amount, $2 billion worth of funding from the state, but that was obviously a unique project. But generally speaking, the Thruway does not receive state tax dollars. It is seeking federal funds, and it did get a federal discretionary grant from the President Biden administration. Secretary Buttigieg, Castleton-on-Hudson Bridge outside of Albany did get $21 million to complete that project, and that obviously will be helpful, but certainly not going to address the underlying financial and pavement issues and bridge issues across the system.
So it comes through federal funding and also the toll increases?
They get very limited federal funding. They don't get any, what we would call formula funding. It will compete for discretionary pots of money for unique, discrete projects. So essentially, it is fully funded by the tolls. The toll
Gotcha.
system funds the Thruway.
Okay, thank you.
And it's worth also noting the report does include a list of the 5 busiest interchanges on the Thruway system. So that does help point out some of the busiest sections of the Thruway.
All right, I have another question that was submitted from Brian Sharp of WXXI. He's having some issues with his mic, so he'd asked if I would read the question. And some of it may have been covered in the previous answer, but the question was, can you discuss how and to what degree the federal infrastructure bill can help with this? And also, are there projections based on people continuing with current travel habits, or do you foresee changes? And in which case, how will those changes impact everyone? And if the revenue is increasing, didn't catch the dollar amounts, is that being siphoned off for other uses, or is it falling short?
Well, to break that question up, and to be honest, there were several items there. I think one thing that really anyone in transportation is looking at is post-pandemic travel patterns, and they seem to be having the most impact on urban travel patterns. That said, across the country, vehicle travel in 2022 was all within 1 or 2 percentage points across the country. But it also appeared that the boost in fuel prices, particularly last summer, tended to suppress that. Early data in 2023 suggests that vehicle travel, at least nationally, is going to be higher than it was pre-COVID. The other thing that we're watching quite closely is freight movement, which obviously has a huge impact on the Thruway, particularly because large trucks, while they're absolutely vital to the economy, they're also putting the most significant stress on the Thruway's roads and bridges. And what we're seeing is a significant increase forecast over the next 20 years. And so we would anticipate that that's going to mean an increase in the wear and tear being experienced by the Thruway. But there might have been a couple of elements that.
Yeah, if I could just, I'm sorry, follow up. I think the second part of that question about the use of the toll increase, it would all go to the Thruway. It would not be used for non-Thruway purposes. So it would not be siphoned off, I think was the question. It would go into the system to preserve the system.
Carolyn, you can just, was there any part of that question that we didn't answer? It was.
I believe you've covered most of it. And Brian, if you're still on, if you have other portions of that question you'd like answered, just submit that to the Q&A box at the bottom. He also did ask if you could discuss any specific challenges in the Rochester or Finger Lakes region and how that compares to the rest of the states.
Well, I think, generally speaking, weather is a bigger impact in the western part of the state, especially the parts that get lake effect snow. Obviously, we're talking about the capital program, and the Thruway has done an excellent job of keeping its operational costs low, but maintaining and preserving it during the winter months is a challenge to make sure that because it is a critical artery for both commercial and passengers, to take care of it as best as possible. So snow and ice operations in the western part of the state are always, at the top of the list of what the Thruway is paying attention to.
And one other question, the name on this isn't indicated, but it asks, with New York's push for electric vehicles, including electric trucks and buses with much heavier weights, what does that suggest for the future of Thruway conditions?
Well, certainly the weight of vehicles comes to bear in terms of wear and tear. We've been kind of keeping an eye out for analysis of those larger vehicles, and at this point, really, there hasn't really been a report that lays out what that impact is. That said, commercial trucks, large commercial vehicles, have a significantly greater impact on overall pavement conditions. As we pointed out, 17% of vehicles on the Thruway are large trucks. So it would seem apparent that if we move to significantly heavier vehicles and similar, number of vehicles, and really the data suggests that we'll be seeing a significant increase in the need for freight movement, including trucking, and passenger vehicle travel is coming back to pre-COVID levels. So certainly, although the data and the analysis still needs to be done, and the future level of weights of electric vehicles into the future obviously are to be determined, it's certainly a legitimate concern.
All right, I don't see any other questions in the chat box or hands up at this point.
Okay, we'll go ahead and conclude today's webinar. I want to particularly thank Michael Flesher for taking time out of his day to participate. Trip, will be available throughout the day for any journalists on the call or who may later on take a look at, because we'll be posting this shortly on our website. But I am also available for any one-on-one video interviews throughout the day. Again, thanks everyone for participating, and hope everyone has a great day and a safe day. Thank you.